For 10 years, I lived in absolute silence. I thought that when I regained my hearing, I would hear birds singing, the wind blowing. But no. The first thing I heard was whispers of betrayal from the very children I loved the most. My name is Serena Hargrove, and I am 68 years old. People once called me many names: the Queen of Real Estate, the Iron Lady, and one newspaper even wrote that I was the woman who turned bricks into gold. But those were stories from many years ago. Now, when I look in the mirror each morning, I no longer see the powerful woman in an elegant business dress. Instead, I see an old woman with silver hair, living quietly on the top floor of a glass tower in the city. And by the way, if you're watching this video, hit the like button and subscribe. I want to see just how far my story can go. Don't forget to drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. I'm really curious. It has been 10 years since I completely lost my hearing. At first, it was ringing in my ears, then stretches of silence that grew longer and longer, until one morning I woke up and the world around me had fallen into absolute stillness. No cars, no voices, not even the sound of my own footsteps. At that moment, I thought I would collapse. But as with so many times before in my life, I forced myself to stand up. I had survived economic crises, billion-dollar deals, and my husband's death. Surely I wouldn't be defeated by silence. The only person who never left me during those darkest days was Clara Diaz. Clara began working for my family when she was very young, back when I had just married William. She started out as a simple housemaid, but over time, Clara became my confidant, my ears and my eyes, observing life for me. After 30 years, I no longer considered Clara an employee, but a part of the family itself. Every morning, Clara would place a cup of hot tea on the table next to the armchair where I sat, then use the sign language we had learned together to greet me. "Good morning, Mrs. Hargrove." I would nod and smile. That was the greatest comfort in this quiet life. I can still speak, of course. But after 10 years of not hearing my own voice, my speech has become awkward, with an uneven pitch. I choose to speak slowly, enunciating each word clearly, or more simply, I write it down. Yet what breaks my heart is that even my own flesh and blood rarely have the patience to understand me. My two daughters, Catherine and Richard, each have their own personality. Catherine, the elder at 41, was once considered my perfect replica when I was young. Sharp, ambitious, always dressed elegantly with a designer handbag swinging on her arm. But what Catherine lacks is patience and a heart that listens. She usually communicates with me by speaking very loudly and very slowly, as though I were a child. But she never takes the time to truly learn sign language. Richard the younger was gentler, less confident. But her life took a different turn after she married Michael, a smooth-talking man I have never truly trusted. Richard often lets her husband lead, and I know that more than once Michael has encouraged her to transfer the property so it's easier to manage. And Pierce, Catherine's husband, hardly needs an introduction. From the start, I saw in his eyes the look of a man who values only money. When William died 8 years ago, I thought my children would draw closer to their mother. But no. Their concern grew more like empty politeness, behind which lurked calculations of inheritance. I know that, in their eyes, I am a deaf, old woman, easy to manipulate, an aging mother whose only remaining worth is an $80 million estate. But what they don't know is that I have decided to change my fate. A week ago, I received a letter from Dr. Nathaniel Chen, a renowned neurosurgeon. After years of research, he had successfully developed a new procedure, implanting neural microchips combined with nerve fiber regeneration technology. I was one of the rare candidates with the potential to regain almost all of my hearing. That letter trembled in my hands all afternoon. I read it over and over again, my heart pounding as if I were 20 again. Could I really hear again? Could I return to the world of sound, the music, the rain, the call of another human voice? The thought both frightened and filled me with hope at the same time. The first thing I did was call Clara into the living room. I showed her the letter and signed, "Only you know about this. I don't want my children to know." Clara's eyes widened in surprise, then she quickly nodded. "Yes, I promise. I'll be by your side." I gripped her hand tightly, warmth spreading through my palm. For a moment, I knew I wasn't alone. I have lived in silence for 10 years, belittled and forgotten by my own family. But now I am ready to step into a new journey. I will have the surgery. I will hear again. And I will not tell anyone in my family, at least not until I know who truly loves me and who only sees me as a means to an end. Tomorrow, Clara will take me to the hospital. A new chapter of my life is about to begin. That morning, Clara took me to Hamilton Clinic, a renowned private medical center on the outskirts of the city. The gleaming glass building reflected the morning sunlight, while rows of golden maples lined the path. To outsiders, I was just a wealthy old woman coming in for an appointment. But only Clara and I knew this was the most important turning point in my life in the past 10 years. At the reception area, Clara carefully explained to the nurse that I was hearing impaired. The nurse smiled and held up a small board with the words, "The hospital has special support equipment for patients with hearing loss." Before long, a tall doctor with graying hair but bright, gentle eyes approached. He introduced himself by writing his name on the board, Dr. Nathaniel Chen. What surprised me was that instead of a regular medical mask, he wore a transparent face shield. Speaking slowly and clearly, he pointed to the text printed on the electronic board on the table as he explained, "We have special clear masks so that patients with hearing loss can read lips. At the same time, this screen will display my words as text." I nearly wanted to cry. For many years, I had grown accustomed to being left out during medical appointments, doctors turning away their mouths covered by masks, forcing me to guess. For the first time, I was treated like a person deserving respect, not a troublesome patient. Dr. Chen reviewed my records and then explained the surgical method, which involves implanting a microchip combined with nerve regeneration therapy to restore the ability to perceive sound. He spoke carefully while I watched every movement of his lips. Clara sat beside me, interpreting in sign language when necessary. When he asked, "Are you afraid?" I nodded slightly. Of course I was. 10 years in silence had turned me into someone else. If I could hear again, would I still recognize myself? At the end of the appointment, he handed me an envelope. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. I gripped the paper tightly, trembling as though I were holding a ticket to another world. On the way back, Clara looked at me through the rearview mirror, her hand resting lightly on the steering wheel. "You're not alone. I'll go with you all the way to the operating room, and I'll be the first one to speak to you, if you can hear again." I smiled, silently grateful. Without Clara, I might not have had the courage. The long dining table in the penthouse glowed under the crystal chandelier. Clara had spent the afternoon preparing dishes, herb-roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, red wine. The atmosphere should have been warm, but only a few minutes after my family arrived, I knew I would have to steel myself against feeling insulted. Catherine appeared first, confident in her elegant dress. She kissed my cheek, her lips moving clearly. "Mother, you look wonderful." I read her lips and gave a small nod. Beside her, Pierce pulled out a chair, his eyes roaming the room as if appraising every painting on the walls. Richard entered hesitantly, followed by Michael, who seemed so indifferent that he barely looked at me. Clara signed to me, "Everyone's here. Let's eat." I nodded. During the meal, Catherine leaned toward me, speaking slowly, each word so exaggerated it felt awkward. "Mother, isn't it tiring you had to manage so many properties at your age?" I watched her lips and understood. then answered aloud in my own voice. My tone was hoarse and uneven, the rhythm slightly off. No. Company. Manage for me. Immediately, Catherine frowned and turned to her husband. See? It's hard to follow when she speaks. Better if she writes. She pushed a notebook and a pen toward me as if giving an order. Before I could react, Pierce cut in. He spoke quickly, his eyes lighting up at the phrase, tax benefit. I couldn't read his lips, but Clara discreetly signed to me. He says to transfer some properties to the daughters to reduce tax burdens. I spoke slowly. I don't think necessary. Michael chuckled under his breath, full of disdain. Catherine pretended not to hear and pushed the notebook closer. Mother, please, write it down. It's easier for everyone. I looked at the notebook, my chest tightening. I could speak. I could communicate if only they had the patience. But they didn't want to. In their eyes, my voice wasn't worth listening to. Slowly, I picked up the pen and wrote a few words. I will think about it. At once, Catherine beamed, and Pierce leaned back in his chair, his eyes satisfied. They believed I had just given in. But inside, I felt like a silent shadow in my own home. Clara placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, her eyes silently sending a message. I understand. You're not alone. Only then could I swallow the bitterness of the dinner. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the vast room. Clara finished cleaning, then placed her hand on my shoulder. Are you okay? I nodded, but inside a storm raged. I was used to loneliness, but never had I felt so belittled as I did tonight. In my children's eyes, I was no longer the mother who had built an empire, but just a deaf, troublesome old woman waiting to hand over her wealth. I opened the notebook and wrote a short line to myself. Tomorrow I will no longer be a burden. I will hear again, and I will show them that silence can also be a weapon. The operating room at Hamilton Clinic was white and bright, like another world. The smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, fluorescent lights reflecting off the cold metal walls. I lay on the operating table, my body draped in sterile sheets. My heart pounded not from fear of death, but from fear of hope. The kind of hope that had lain dormant for 10 years and was now rising again. Dr. Nathaniel Chen appeared in green surgical scrubs, half of his face covered by a clear protective shield. But this time, instead of forcing me to strain to read his lips, he placed a tablet on an angled stand right beside me. Every word he spoke would be automatically converted into text on the screen. The first line appeared, "The surgery will last about 4 hours. We'll implant the microchip and regenerate the nerve fibers. You may feel pressure, but no pain." I nodded, my eyes fixed on each word. For the first time in my life as a deaf patient, I felt truly engaged in an equal conversation. Clara stood beside me, gripping my hand, her eyes brimming with tears. I turned to her and spoke slowly, each word uneven. "Don't leave me." Clara nodded, squeezing my hand tighter. "I'll be here until you open your eyes." A nurse brought the anesthesia mask closer. Dr. Chen typed another line. "Count backward from 10. When you wake up, everything may be different." I closed my eyes, my breath quickening, then drifted into darkness. When I opened my eyes, the world blurred in a haze of white light. My head felt heavy, my ears stuffed, as if someone had packed them with cotton. Before I could even make sense of it, a faint sound emerged. Beep, beep, beep. The sound of a heart monitor. Weak, muffled, but unmistakable. I froze. After 10 years, I was hearing a real sound again. Then came something else, the soft squeak of rubber shoes on the floor, clear yet delicate. And then a voice, deep and warm, echoing as if from underwater. "Mrs. Hargrove, can you hear me?" I burst into tears. It was Dr. Chen. I could hear him. I nodded, my lips trembling. Yes, I hear... Clara rushed over, her eyes spilling with tears. I heard her sob, clumsy and tuneless, but to me it was the most beautiful music in the world. "Oh, Mrs. Hargrove!" Clara laughed and cried simultaneously. "You can hear now!" I grasped her hand and whispered, "Don't tell anyone, not yet." Clara's eyes widened. "But why? This is a miracle. Your daughters will be thrilled." I shook my head, lowering my voice this time more clearly, now that I could adjust my own volume. "No, let them think. I'm still deaf. I must know the truth." Clara fell silent, understanding immediately. Worry flickered in her eyes, but so did sympathy. All afternoon, I lay in the recovery room, my ears receiving a cascade of sounds like a child hearing the world for the first time. The quiet hum of the air conditioner, footsteps in the hallway, the soft rustle of paper as Clara turned a page. To anyone else, these were ordinary noises. To me, they were treasures. I gently touched my ears and whispered, "I'm back." But at the same time, another resolve rose within me. This wasn't just about hearing birds sing or raindrops fall. I would use these newly restored ears to hear the truths my family had been hiding. I had lived in silence for 10 years. Now, my feigned silence would become my strongest weapon, and I swore no one would ever suspect that the deaf, slow old woman they had underestimated had been hearing everything all along. I returned to the penthouse late in the afternoon. The city below was ablaze with lights, but to me everything seemed cloaked in a new hue. Every sound, the wind slipping through the doorframe, Clara's slippers brushing the stone floor, the elevator button clicking, rang out distinctly. I felt as though I had been reborn. Clara helped me into my familiar armchair. She smiled, whispering, "Thank God you can hear again. I still can't believe it." I placed a finger to my lips, signaling for silence. Then I leaned toward Clara, speaking very softly but firmly, "Remember, no one knows." Clara nodded, her eyes slightly red. She understood. My newly restored ears weren't just to hear the birds sing in the morning. They would be the key to unlocking the secrets my daughters and their husbands were hiding. That evening, Catherine and Pierce came by unannounced. I heard the elevator stop at the top floor, hurried footsteps, and Pierce's low voice just before the door opened. "Just keep her calm. Once she signs, the rest is ours." I shivered. Until now, I had only guessed at their greed. This was the first time I'd heard a blatant confession with my own ears. When they walked in, Catherine still wore her fake smile, speaking slowly, her lips moving clearly. "Mother, how are you feeling today?" I pretended not to catch everything and turned to Clara. Clara signed the question, and I nodded, writing a few words in the notebook. "Tired but fine." Pierce glanced at me, then instantly switched to a sweet tone. "You know, Vivian, the Hamptons properties, they're such a burden for you." I caught part of his lips, and Clara quickly signed the rest. I looked down at the notebook and slowly wrote, "We'll think about it." They both exhaled in relief, thinking I had wavered, but inside me, anger flared. When they left, I carefully left the door ajar, then stood silently in the hallway, hidden behind the marble wall. I heard Pierce making a phone call right outside the door. "Yes, the money will be moved this week. She's clueless. Still writing in that damn notebook. Don't worry, we'll get the signature soon." Each word was like a blade stabbing my heart. I gripped the notebook so tightly that my nails dug into the leather cover. That night, I sat in the study and opened an old drawer, taking out an empty file folder. On the cover, I wrote in firm strokes, "Family Truth, Confidential." This would be my secret file. Every whisper, every leaked phone call, every suspicious expression, I would record them all. The next day, I called Stanford Walsh, the family's lawyer and companion for decades. When he arrived, I invited him into my office. Clara closed the door firmly and stood guard in the hallway. I looked straight into Stanford's eyes and spoke slowly. I can hear. Again. Surgery. Success. He froze for a moment, then smiled, moved. Serena, that's incredible. But why the secrecy? I handed him the file, flipping through the first pages marked with notes. Pierce, phone call, moving money. Catherine wants Hampton's transfer. Because, I said, my voice steadier now, I must know how far they've gone. I need proof, and I need you to prepare quietly. Stanford nodded, his expression grave. He understood. This wasn't just about assets. It was a battle within my own family. In the days that followed, I trained myself to catch even the smallest sounds. No more relying on the broadcast-like voices of others. I focused on the close-up sounds. Pierce's calls when he forgot to shut his office door. Catherine's complaints in the kitchen to Clara. Michael's murmurs to Richard when he thought I was asleep. Clara became my most loyal ally. Whenever I missed something, she quickly signed it for me. Whenever Pierce or Michael let something slip, Clara discreetly added notes to my file. The two of us were like spies in my own home, quietly collecting pieces to complete the larger picture. One evening, while I was writing, Clara placed her hand on my shoulder. "Aren't you afraid they'll find out?" I looked up and smiled faintly, my voice still stiff but less shaky now. For years, they thought silence made me weak. But silence is my strength now. Let them believe I am deaf. Every word they whisper is mine. Clara looked at me, her eyes filled with admiration and pity. She had been by my side for 30 years, but perhaps only now did she truly see me as a warrior. That night before bed, I opened the window and listened to the city beyond. Car horns, the wind sweeping past the glass tower, the faint murmur of life. My heart surged with a strange mix of feelings, a combination of pain and fierce determination. For so long, I had been the woman in silence. But now, I was the woman in the dark, hearing everything, ready to bring every secret into the light. On Friday afternoon, Catherine and Pierce showed up again, this time without their fake social smiles, but carrying a thick stack of documents. I was sitting in the living room when Pierce carefully laid the papers before me, his voice deliberately slow, each word dripping like honey. "Mother, these are just some routine papers. Nothing complicated, only for convenience to reduce taxes." I read his lips well enough to understand, then pretended to frown, lifting my notebook to write, "Which properties?" Catherine quickly cut in, her lips moving clearly, her eyes gleaming with false encouragement. "Just the Hamptons' houses. They're difficult for you to manage." I flipped through the first few pages, and there it was, the truth. Not only the 2 Hamptons' houses, but also 3 commercial towers in the city center, plus the lakeside Vermont estate where William and I had spent so many happy summers together. Rage swelled inside me, but I restrained it, keeping my expression distant. I picked up the pen and scrawled a shaky line. "Too complicated. Need time." Pierce frowned, then forced a thin smile. "Of course, Mother. Take your time." Catherine lightly placed her hand on my shoulder, her eyes brimming with concern that was nothing but an act. "But don't wait too long. Tax deadlines are strict, you know." I nodded absent-mindedly, feigning ignorance, then wrote another line. "We'll ask Stanford to review." The moment Stanford Walsh's name appeared on the page, I caught the faint twitch in Pierce's expression, a tiny crack, but enough to know I had struck a nerve. "Stanford is old-fashioned," he said quickly, his lips moving too fast for me to catch, forcing Clara to translate in sign language. "He doesn't understand modern estate planning." "We can explain better than he." I tilted my head, pretending not to follow, then closed the folder and set it aside. Clara stood quietly behind me, her face tense, but her eyes flashed with solidarity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I left the lights off and sat by the window in darkness, my ears straining to catch every sound. Near midnight, I caught the familiar footsteps below in the lobby, Pierce. I cracked open the balcony door, the night wind carrying voices up from the street. His voice was urgent on the phone. "We need to move the rest of the money before she changes the will." "She's suspicious. I can tell. Don't wait for Monday, get it done by tomorrow." Each word sliced into me like a blade. There was no longer any doubt. He had been stealing, and now he wanted to strip away what was left before I could act. I sat up abruptly, my trembling hand resting on the Family Truth Confidential file I had been keeping. Its pages were already filled with every whisper, every glance, every scheme. I knew it was time to turn these words into a weapon. The next morning, I summoned Stanford. I handed him the contract Pierce had brought, my finger tapping the line, "Property transfer." "They want me to sign. What do you think?" Stanford frowned as he turned the pages. He sighed, his voice low and heavy. "This isn't just tax planning. This is a complete asset grab. If you sign, Serena, you'll lose control of nearly half your empire." I nodded, my voice still hoarse but firm with resolve. "I won't sign, but I will let them think. I'm considering." He looked up, his aged eyes gleaming. "You're setting a trap." I smiled faintly. For the first time in years, I felt I was no longer the victim hiding in the shadows. I was back in the role I had once mastered, the strategist at the chessboard. That night, I sat before the mirror, gazing at my silver hair and lined face. The woman staring back at me was no longer the queen of real estate, but her eyes still shone with the clarity of someone seasoned, someone who understood the true power of silence. I whispered, hearing my own voice echo in the room, strange, yet powerful. "It's time." It was time to pull down the curtain. With just one evening, I would expose everything. They thought I was a deaf, frail old woman, easy to deceive. But they had no idea I had heard every scheme, every word of betrayal. And soon, in this very room, the truth would ring out so clearly that no one could deny it. The long walnut dining table in the penthouse was draped with a pristine white cloth, set with antique porcelain plates and crystal glasses glittering beneath the chandelier. White roses lined the table, while steaming dishes filled the air with a warm aroma. Clara had prepared everything meticulously, but we both knew this was not simply a family dinner. This would be a trial without a judge, only truth, and those about to be accused. I sat at the head of the table, calm-faced, with my notebook and pen beside me. As the elevator doors chimed, I held my breath, ready for the final act. Catherine appeared first, wearing a tight dress, a strained smile pasted on her lips. Pierce followed, carrying the familiar briefcase. Richard and Michael arrived last, their eyes uneasy. They all pretended to smile, but I heard their tense breathing, the heavy thud of shoes on the floor, and Pierce's hurried whisper to Catherine in the hallway, "Tonight we finish this." Clara signed with her hands. "They're all here." I nodded, gesturing for them to sit. The meal began under a veil of awkwardness. Catherine laughed loudly, feigning concern. "Mother, you must try this salad. It's good for your health." I picked up my pen, scribbling a short line. "Thank you." Richard smiled faintly from time to time, but her eyes kept avoiding mine. Michael drank glass after glass of wine, trying to mask his nerves. Pierce sat still, eyes cold but restless, his hand resting on the briefcase. I pretended to be clumsy, sometimes asking Clara to translate and sign, sometimes burying my head in the notebook. All of them believed I still lived in a world of silence. By the time the main course was served, Pierce suddenly placed the briefcase on the table, opened it, and slid a thick stack of papers toward me. "Serena," he said, his lips moving clearly. "It's time. Just sign here, for everyone's benefit." I stared at the documents, unmoving. Clara glanced at me, tension in her eyes. Catherine leaned forward, her voice honeyed but pressing. "Mother, don't you trust us? This is only to help you." I picked up the pen, pretending to write, but then stopped suddenly. I lifted my head, slowly raised a glass of red wine, letting the liquid catch the crystal light. Then, with a voice that had lain dormant for 10 years, I spoke clearly, trembling, yet resounding across the room. "We haven't even finished dinner, and you already want to take all of your mother's assets?" The sound rang out unsteady but firm. The entire table froze. Michael nearly dropped his glass. Catherine's mouth fell open, her lips trembling. Richard clutched her napkin tightly, eyes wide, and Pierce's face drained of color in an instant, as if the blood had been sucked from his veins. I set the glass back on the table, my gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. "Surprised?" I continued, my voice still hoarse but steady. "I can hear again. For the past week, I've heard everything. Every whisper, every phone call, every plan you thought you could hide from me." Clara stood behind me, her eyes brimming with tears. She had waited for this moment with me. "Catherine," I looked straight at my eldest, "I heard you call me a burden." "Pierce," I turned to him, "I heard you ordering the money moved before I could change the will. Michael, I heard you plotting to use my money to pay your debts. And Richard," my voice softened, "I heard you stay silent, letting it all happen." No one uttered a word. The only sound was the faint clink of silverware against porcelain, sharp and cold. I opened the nearby drawer and pulled out the thick file, the pages I had been compiling all week. I placed it on the table, under their horrified stares. "Here is the proof. Dates, words, everything. Stanford already has copies. Nothing can be denied now." Catherine stammered, her voice shaking. "Mother, you misunderstood." I cut her off, my tone steel-like. "No. For 12 years, I lived in silence, believing in the love of family. But that silence became the curtain you used to hide your greed, and now the curtain has fallen." Pierce tried to rise, his voice frantic. "Serena, listen, this is just a strategy." "Enough!" I thundered, each word deliberate. "I have heard enough. And from now on, nothing will ever be the same." The air thickened, stretched taut like a string about to snap. They stared at me, terrified and disbelieving. The woman they had dismissed as deaf and feeble now sat tall before them, holding every ounce of power. I straightened, my hand resting on the file like a judge, delivering the final verdict. "This is not the end. This is just the beginning. The empire of this family will not fall into the hands of traitors." Clara laid a gentle hand on my shoulder, the final punctuation to this fateful evening. The room fell into heavy silence, but this time it was the silence of the exposed. The air in the dining room was so thick it could be cut into blocks. After my declaration that I could hear again, no one dared to speak. Only the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall marked the passing seconds. I sat upright at the head of the table, my hand resting on the file Stanford had prepared. I opened it slowly, each rustling page slicing through the tense silence. My voice, hoarse but firm, rang across the room. "This is the detailed report prepared by Stanford Walsh, our family's attorney. Over the past 14 months, more than 60 unauthorized transactions have been carried out from my accounts. The total amount withdrawn exceeds $2 million US. Catherine shot to her feet, her face pale. "Mother, that can't be right." I cut her off, my voice rising. "Silence. Whose signature is this? Here, here, and here." I flipped through 3 pages, pointing to each bold signature. Catherine bowed her head, her trembling hands twisting together. Catherine Hargrove, you signed. Not once, but at least 14 times in major transactions. Don't tell me this is a misunderstanding. Your handwriting does not lie. Pierce jumped in, his voice hurried. I advised her. These were strategic transfers, investments for the family's good. I slammed the file down on the table, making the glasses rattle. For the family's good? Or for your own pockets? Stanford confirmed there were no investments. Every dollar went into offshore accounts. Michael looked down in silence. Richard's eyes filled with tears, but she dared not speak in defense. I drew in a deep breath, then pulled out a sealed red envelope. All eyes were fixed on it, the tension like awaiting the final verdict. I spoke evenly. Yesterday, I signed a new will. From now on, the majority of the Hargrove estate will no longer be in your hands. It will be transferred into the Hargrove Foundation, dedicated to building a center for the hearing impaired to give opportunities to those like me, those the world has forgotten. A chorus of sharp breaths erupted around the table. Catherine's jaw dropped. Richard burst into sobs. Michael dropped his fork, and Pierce's face flushed crimson as he clenched the handle of his briefcase. I continued, my voice calm but edged with steel. As for you, there will be no more allowances, no more company cars, no more credit cards. Everything has been revoked as of this morning. From now on, you will have to work, to earn, just like everyone else. Mother, you can't do this, Catherine screamed, her voice breaking. I already have, I answered, my gaze drilling into hers. I paused, then looked toward Clara, who had been standing behind me the entire time. I motioned her forward. When she hesitantly stepped to my side, I placed my hand over hers, my voice softening. And in the new will, Clara Diaz is named. After 30 years of loyalty and devotion, Clara will receive a luxury apartment, a lifetime allowance, and the position of overseer in the Hargrove Foundation. Why? Because Clara is the only one who never abandoned me, and I will not abandon her. Clara burst into tears, overwhelmed, while I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. Across the table, Catherine's voice trembled. So, we're nothing to you now? After everything? I looked directly at her, my voice heavy with sorrow yet unyielding. Not nothing. You are still my children. But if you see me only as a walking wallet, then I would rather entrust my fortune to someone more deserving. The room fell silent. No one could speak. The ticking of the clock seemed 10 times louder. I stood, placing my hand on the file and the envelope, declaring the final words like a closing decree. Tonight, a new life begins. Not just for me, but for all of us. Who will change and who will fall? That is up to you. I turned and walked away, leaving them in the heavy room where, for the first time, true power had returned to its rightful place, in my hands. And so the family trial ended without a courtroom, without a judge. Only truth remained, along with a verdict that could never be overturned. Time passed faster than I had imagined. Just a few months after that night, the family trial. Everyone's life had completely changed. Pierce vanished from the city without a goodbye. Rumor had it that he fled to Dubai, seeking another wealthy patron to cling to. I didn't bother to care. A man who lived off other people's money was bound to destroy himself sooner or later. Catherine no longer had her glamorous facade. After divorcing Pierce, she left her luxurious home, gave up her credit cards and company car. I arranged for her to start working at Hargrove Properties, not in a management role, but as an assistant in the marketing department, a job no one would have expected the daughter of the queen of real estate to take. Initially, Catherine was angry and humiliated, but step by step, she learned to listen to her colleagues, to take responsibility, and to actually work. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of my younger self in Catherine, not blind ambition, but the ability to stand on her own 2 feet. Richard and Michael struggled more. Their company collapsed, and their house was repossessed by the bank. They moved into a small apartment, selling off most of their belongings to pay debts. I remember visiting once, seeing Richard washing dishes in cold water while Michael sat at an old wooden table, tapping at his laptop searching for jobs. Richard's eyes were tired, but there was a different light there now: determination. Gradually, she began taking freelance web design projects, and Michael found an office job. They lived simply, but seemed happier than before, when love had been buried under bills and mounting loans. As for me, life opened into a new chapter. With my entire fortune transferred to the Hargrove Foundation, Stanford and I began work on the biggest project of my life, the Hargrove Hearing Recovery Center. More than a medical facility, it was my dream to give a chance at hearing to those who had endured silence as I had. Clara became my indispensable right hand, serving as my supervisor. She oversaw every contract, managed every expense, and more importantly, reminded me why we had started this journey, not for prestige, but for the small, forgotten people who needed a second chance. On the day of the inauguration, the sky was clear, and a cool breeze stirred the flag at the center's gate. I stood at the podium looking down at the seats below: patients, doctors, reporters, and my 2 daughters. Catherine wore a simple dress, no longer flaunting designer brands. Richard held Michael's hand, her smile shy but genuine. In that moment, I realized perhaps all the pain, betrayal, and tears had led us here. I held the microphone, my voice steadier than it had been in years. 10 years ago, I lost my hearing and thought the world had shut its doors on me. But thanks to medicine, I was given a second chance. Hearing brings us back to the world, but understanding brings us back to each other. This center is not only a symbol of medicine, but also a testament that when we truly listen with our ears and our hearts, we can regain what we thought was lost. Applause rose like waves, echoing in my chest. I heard each clap distinctly, vibrant, sincere, no longer foreign. That evening, the whole family gathered at the penthouse. No contracts, no arguments. Just a simple meal Clara had cooked: the roast chicken Catherine loved as a child, and the apple pie Richard had adored when she was little. As dinner drew to a close, Catherine took my hand, her eyes red. "Mother, I'm sorry for everything." Richard whispered too. "Me too. We forgot what you needed. Beyond money." I looked at my 2 daughters, then pulled them into my arms. This time, I heard every sob, every apology clearly. But above all, I heard laughter, the sound that had been missing from this home for far too long. I closed my eyes. After so many years, I had not only regained my hearing, but also my sense of smell. I had found something far more precious: true love and understanding.